This is Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Khanam.
And this is Jamal Dejani.
Well, to our listeners in the greater Bay Area and throughout the world who are viewing and listening to Arab Talk, we continue to come from you from shelter in place and lockdown mode here in Northern California. Jamal, the bad news is that the situation regarding the coronavirus continues on an extremely negative trend. As of today, we have about 1.26 million confirmed cases in the United States. We have over 75,000 Americans died worldwide. We have close to 3.8 million confirmed cases, and the deaths are 265,000 deaths. And frankly, there really is no end in sight, despite what you may be hearing and seeing on some corporate media stations or coming from the White House. The situation with the coronavirus remains staggeringly bad, not only for the world, but for the United States.
That's right, Jess. And we want to talk about this more later on, especially because now, as you know, I don't know what's the latest number of how many states are opening, but we're looking at more, I think, than 40 states are going back to basically, businesses, allowing businesses to open with certain restrictions like keeping 6 feet distance and wearing masks and so forth. We live in a state, we're in California, even though things have been changing. California shelter-in-place orders remain valid until May 31st. But the governor yesterday was talking about also loosening some of those restrictions in a kind of step-by-step, getting people reintegrating into the new norms that will be implemented soon. So I want to talk about this later on, but we've been following several stories.
Yeah, we have
across the globe, including, of course, in the United States. And one story that I couldn't get my head wrapped on, just this really troubled me, is the story of Ahmaud Arbery. And Ahmaud Arbery is a young man, 25-year-old, who was actually shot down by an ex-policeman and his son back in February 23rd.
Right.
And to tell you the truth, this story kind of like was just a little blurb out there that's here yet another African American young man gets basically chased and shot. Kind of a reminder of the many other cases like this, but not until the past few days when a video surfaced, Jess, and the video taken by another car that was following these two white guys, the father and his son, basically driving behind Ahmaud, chasing him. He basically was jogging in their neighborhood,
right?
And he just continues to on his way. They keep chasing him. Then they kind of try to intercept him, and then you see Ahmaud getting shot by a shotgun. He tried to defend himself to reach for the shotgun. I mean, that's the reaction of anyone if you see either fight or flee, right? In these cases, and then he gets executed in broad daylight. And I don't know, I don't want to blame the person taking the video. I don't know what the story with the video, because I don't know what's the source of that video. But then you have another person who's kind of basically taking a video of this thing instead of dialing 911 or doing something about it. And of course, these guys just did not spend 1 second in jail. So after the police arrived, they just let them go and basically they were told that this is it's legal, right? It's to carry weapons and also to stop people.
It's an unbelievable story, Jamal.
And so the story dies in the media. So again, we're talking about this is February 23rd. Now we're talking about it in May, which means they were going to be out free, and no one would have heard about this case until that video surfaced, even though the police had it. This is another thing. They had it for many months, preventing the family from acquiring it. And now it's out there, and anyone who watches it just can see that this was a blatant execution in broad daylight. Ahmaud did not carry a weapon. He was not a threat. And then you read all these different parts of the story from interviews conducted by neighbors and people who lived in the neighborhood, that this young man, who was, by the way, a football star
right.
in the local high school, he just went jogging every single day. That
right.
was his route.
That's right.
That was his route. Even people said, "Yeah, we know. Like we could also almost adjust our clocks to his time. I mean, just like clockwork. Here he goes, on his daily exercise." And then of course, the alleged killers said that they suspected that he was involved in they've had burglaries in the neighborhood, and they were trying to pin it on him, which is totally false. So not until this video, and I'm just saying, okay, the crime itself is a horrific crime. That's why I said I can't wrap my head around it. And then just to kind of have this police department just totally ignore it, allow these people to walk away, didn't even bring them to the police station for questioning, and say, yeah, that's fine, we're letting you go, it's self-defense or whatever. They took their word. Isn't this a pattern? I mean, come on, Jess.
Well, Jamal, I think part of the issue here is that we have these stories come up all the time. We say the same thing, that we can't believe it. But the reality is, in 2020, in May, we are living in a country where African American men can be shot and killed in broad daylight, and there can be no consequences and a cover-up, and that this is a regular occurrence even in 2020. Some people might say, and I think you and I are probably thinking along the same lines, is that African American men are being shot and killed by these white supremacists, white vigilantes, in a way because, as we've talked about before, they're given somehow license to kill. This is a cultural point in our history as the United States, where because of what happens at the very top in terms of the leadership of our government, that people feel like it's okay, that they have a license to kill, that they can go out there under the guise of keeping their neighborhood safe and secure, which is totally bogus, in this case especially, go out armed to the teeth and basically murder in cold blood a young African-American man. You and I are outraged by this. We see people being outraged by it, but every day, every week, we see people of color being murdered and killed in this similar manner. We're going to talk about the coronavirus situation later, but it's all part of the larger cultural context of what's happening to people of color right now. When there's economic disparities, when there's a pandemic, when there's a culture and a license for people to feel like they can go out and just murder in cold blood people of color. I found this story not only just troubling, Jamal, but in the current context and climate, especially worrisome.
And I should have mentioned earlier that this happened in the state of Georgia and the city of Brunswick.
Yeah.
In Georgia. Again, if this video uh, did not catch fire on the internet.
No one would
And
have said anything.
no one would have said anything. I mean, we live in California. Only major stories make the news. This wasn't a big story. It was yet just another young man getting killed, an African American man getting killed. That's basically, and it would have been just basically brushed under the rug. And now, to me, I mean, just the fact that these guys, they are still out there. They haven't gotten arrested. They haven't been questioned. They're not out on bail. They just basically were asked a couple of questions by the police officer and were let go. And then the fact that the father is part of that police department, so he's a retired. So there is that whole connection. There is the racism, in my opinion, aspect, that the fact that these people give themselves the green light to chase after a young man in broad daylight jogging and kill him. And then at the same time, there is that corruption part, which needs to be investigated all the way to the roots, because just the fact, imagine, just a question. If a brown man, a black man did the same thing to a white man, I just want to be very blunt, two black people ran or chased after a white jogger and shot him dead, would they be let go?
No, it would be it would be national news story. We would be hearing about it on the national news every day for weeks. There would be a complete investigation, and it would be top news. I know we're going to talk about this later, Jamal, but the reality is the murder of Ahmaud Arbery and his brutal, there's no other way to talk about it, assassination in broad daylight, is also connected to the fact that African American men especially, and people of color and men especially, are dying at such a much greater rate with the pandemic, with the COVID-19 pandemic. And there's another part of this story, Jamal, which I know we'll talk to, but I think, is important. Going back to work and opening the economy, as Trump likes to say it, he's not asking people who have a lot of money to go back to work. He's asking people of color who are working in the trenches, who don't have PPE, to go back to work and put themselves at risk. And so the assassination of Ahmaud Arbery and what's happening, forcing, the hard labor market, basically, which is primarily people of color, Latinos, African Americans, and other people of color, to go back to work under unsafe situation, is really part of the same story that we have to talk about here.
That's right. We're gonna pick up on this later on, Jess. I wanna take us to overseas because luckily, actually, last show we've had a couple of guests who, one from Lebanon, one from Jordan, Palestine, give us reports from the ground on the coronavirus, but also because of the pandemic, we've been. I wouldn't say neglecting, but we didn't have the time to cover a lot of stories outside the coronavirus issue. Just what we're going to be talking about, as you know, Jess, the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is planning a visit to Palestine/Israel, that's how he describes, or the West Bank. And he had an interview recently, and it was carried on Channel 13, the Israeli Channel 13, talking about the annexation of the West Bank. His trip is yet to be, by the way, formally announced, but he has been making a lot of noise about it. But the one who has been making a lot of noise about it is our U.S. ambassador, David Friedman, in Jerusalem, basically going around talking all over the Israeli media. I should add, interviews on Channel 13, interviews on Haaretz, Jerusalem Post, Yidaot Ahronot. He's basically marketing this whole concept of the annexation. So on Wednesday, he said to Israel Hayom, which I should remind our listeners, Israel Hayom, which means Israel today,
right,
is owned by no other than Sheldon Adelson.
Right.
Okay, just we've talked about Sheldon Adelson. This is and it's the most popular publication for the Israeli colonial settlers living on stolen land in the West Bank, Israel Hayom, and it's very, very powerful, very widely read. And he said that the Trump administration is ready to recognize Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank within weeks. And he added that one condition for such a move would be an agreement between the next Israeli government and the Palestinians to hold negotiations over the American Middle East plan, which was unveiled, as you know, and rejected in January. That the so-called deal of the century, the Kushner deal of the century, which they basically unveiled it before the Israeli elections, which didn't happen in March, or they did happen and nobody won, and that's why Israel is heading towards a coalition government. So if you read in his words, and I read it in different angles in the one interview, and he keeps repeating the same thing, and you know what he sounds like, Jess, and I'm very sad to bring this out.
What?
It sounds like blackmail. It sounds like, I mean, it's not, I mean, the way he says it is that we are going to recognize this unilateral annexation. The United States is going to recognize this unilateral annexation unless, basically, the Palestinian Authority accepts the deal of the century, which they rejected.
Right.
Which they've rejected without much fanfare. The whole world rejected except for some of the cheerleaders of Trump in the Arab world. But everyone basically rejected it. It's kind of like dead on arrival, the whole thing. And then they're saying, we're gonna just let them annex the West Bank just like we allowed them to annex the Golan Heights, unless you go back and accept the deal of the century and agree to sit down with the Israelis and basically sign on the dotted line, accepted all, which we talked extensively about the deal of the century, how it's going to create basically a bunch of Bantustans, and there's not going to be sovereignty over Jerusalem, and all the nonsense that was there. In return, the Palestinians will receive few $billion, right, which mostly come from Saudi Arabia and other countries, not the United States, which I doubted very much. As you know, today, just the Saudis are crying about the price of oil, so they won't have even the money to fund such a deal.
Well, Jamal, I don't think it sounds like blackmail. I think it is blackmail. And part of the calculation that's going on right now is that a lot of Republicans and pro-Israel supporters do in fact see the potential for the writing to be on the wall for the Trump administration. And they're doing this calculation right now in terms of being able to, as greedy a way as possible, annex, destroy, codify the Israeli illegal occupation of Palestine. And I think you're going to see this at a rapid rate. This is the typical Israeli strategy, as you know, Jamal. If there's a big natural disaster, a pandemic, an earthquake, a 9/11, something like that, they use it as a pretext to extend their illegal colonization and occupation of and theft of Palestinian land. The same thing is going on now, despite all the other political upheaval that is going on with Israeli politicians. But I do believe that there is a calculation going on right now that there's a really good chance that there may only be 6 to 8 months left of the Trump administration. And if that's the case, annexation has to be on the table, even though it'll only be approved or sanctioned by the United States. And they're going to try to steal as much Palestinian land and destroy any sense of Palestinian sovereignty as quickly as possible. I think, Jamal, this could be among the more difficult and ugliest 6 months for Palestinians coming up right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mean, the timing of it when the entire world is trying to deal with the COVID-19, the Trump administration goes back to this failed.
I mean, people aren't even looking that much. They're not looking that much about what's happening in Palestine right now because of the pandemic. I mean, people don't really care about Israeli politics right now.
Not only this, I mean, the question is this our priority? And I'm talking about the United States. Is this the priority now, going back and giving Israel a gift and allowing them to grab more land when we need to take care of this country, when we need to go back, help our businesses and find a cure for this pandemic, and also lend maybe a hand to the rest of the parts of the world when we can, those who don't have the resources, trying to fight the virus instead of just playing this political gimmick, basically, that they have, to basically bolsters Netanyahu, because as you know, now they're heading towards a unity government with Gantz, but also to basically prop him, which is ridiculous in my opinion. And as you know, Palestinians have been left alone during this crisis because the United States has cut off aid, and many countries has done the same. Israel basically, although claims sovereignty over a united Jerusalem, takes care of only the Jewish side of Jerusalem and let people basically, unprotected in the eastern part, and that's why you have a high number of cases.
But the thing that
Jerusalem.
And one of the things I found really disturbing, Jamal, in the midst of all this, I mean, in the United States right now, 33 million people have filed for unemployment. We are likely going through one of the greatest economic disasters and catastrophes since the Great Depression. And yet you have AIPAC and its surrogates in Congress still trying, despite the fact that so many millions of Americans are going to lose their jobs, are going to get sick and die, that we're going to go through this economic catastrophe. You have AIPAC and its surrogates in Congress, Jamal, trying to figure out a way to not only continue to give Israel the $3 billion a year, but figure out a way to give them even more money right now. There was a report that came out right now that Israeli lobbyists and AIPAC surrogates are working behind the scenes to try to get even more money to be sent over to the Israeli government, because the Israeli economy is also having a difficult time right now. So if Americans really knew that while they're standing in bread lines, while they're standing in lines that are 2 and 3 miles long to get a little basket of food and are trying to get their unemployment benefits, that their Congress people are trying to get more money sent to Israel right now, they would be truly outraged. And it is an outrage to see this at this time.
It is an outrage. And talking about this, by the way, there was a story, also a recent story about an Israeli who basically fleeced, and this is the word that I'm going to use, the state of New York with about $61 million. Just saying that they will be procuring, ventilators, which never materialized. I didn't hear about it. No one heard about it, and no one heard that the state of New York was engaged in trying to buy equipment from Israel. This dude who lives in in the United States, and he's an Israeli. He basically went on our State Department's website because they were putting out their bids, just to buy, equipment from different countries and masks and so forth, and managed to get this contract, and he got paid for it
without delivering the goods.
Without delivering the goods.
Yeah.
I mean, it's isn't this crazy?
Yeah, it's crazy, and they'll probably get away with it. And then you have Bank Hapolim, basically involved in a money laundering scheme involving, again, one of the largest Israeli banks with the United States, basically laundering almost $1 billion. They are finally being held to account. I mean, it's really staggering and I'm sorry to keep going back to this, Jamal, but when you see the impact of this economic catastrophe and what it's doing to Americans, and you see these Israeli surrogates, these American citizens who are Israeli surrogates, trying to basically take American money away from Americans who are starving, literally starving to death, and have no money, and send it to this colonial state right now, it's truly unbelievable. And because people are suffering so much, Jamal, we can't expect people to be, keeping their eye on the ball the way we are about some of these things. But it's truly amazing to see the depth of the corruption.
So here is the story, and this was, by the way, I misstated that it was purchased by the State Department. I should say it was purchased by the New York Department of Health, which paid $69.1 million, not $61 million, $69.1 million to a Silicon Valley engineer. He's an Israeli citizen, promising to sell them ventilators to hospitals, basically. So $69.1 million to this guy. His name is Yaron Oren Pines, an electrical engineer who immigrated to the United States in the 1990s. And by the way, Mr. Pines specializes in cell phone technology and lacks any apparent experience in government contracting or knowledge in medical devices. He just jumped on the bandwagon because he could just apply. And on March 30th, the New York State paid Oren Pines $69.1 million for 1,450 ventilators at the cost of, and I'm sure this is going to floor you, Jess, of $47,656 per ventilator.
Wow.
So, almost $50,000 per unit. Triple the standard retail price of top-notch models. Even this price is high because of the coronavirus. They paid triple the price. He was promising that he's going to bring them these ventilators from Israel. And the state official, speaking on condition of anonymity, said New York reached out to Oren Pines after the White House coronavirus task force explicitly, guess what, recommended him.
Oh no!
Somebody recommend.
We know who, Jamal. It's Jared Kushner.
Yeah. So this guy who has nothing to do with medical devices.
I mean, I don't know if it's Jared Kushner, obviously, but I suspect that he and some of his cronies were behind this.
All of a sudden, his name comes as a recommended source on the list of the state. That's what they said, the White House and the State Department, recommending him to the state of California to say, here is your man, buy it from him. Well, guess what? Not a single ventilator was shipped. Okay?
Yeah, of course.
And at the time, at the time of this became an investigation, and I'm reading this from Haaretz, and also another source for the story is BuzzFeed's reported on the matter. The spokesperson for Vice President Mike Pence, Katie Miller, said in a statement that the White House coronavirus task force was never informed of this contract and was not involved in it at all. What kind of government we have? I mean, who should we believe? The state of California says that they got a recommendation from the White House and they got duped or they got fleeced with $69 million, or the state of California, the state of New York, the White House saying, "Oh, we have nothing to do with it." So this is this organization. This is an example, and this is the reason I know about the story, because you and I, we always are digging for stories, and thankfully this was published. By the way, this was published on BuzzFeed. It wasn't like headline news on the New York Times or other major publications, or major discussion on CNN or Fox News for sure. Wasn't there. And the Israeli media reported on it. And so now what? $69 million are gone with the wind?
Well, yeah. That's right, Jamal.
So anyway, you're listening to Arab Talk Radio on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM, and we'll continue our broadcast from our shelter in place. And so, Jess, I want to go back to actually now.
Can I just say one quick thing? I have to just bring up the connection to Brazil.
Go ahead.
Because there are two world leaders that are science deniers that fit the profile of denying science, being somewhat of a despot, putting their countries at risk. And the fourth thing that they have in common is a love for other, kind of racist colonial states. And I'm talking about the president of Brazil, Jamal, Jair Bolsonaro, who continues to put his country, Brazil, at grave risk. Brazil right now, and especially among indigenous people of the Amazon and some of the states around the Amazon, are getting exposed and have the coronavirus and are dying at such an alarming rate. Yet President Bolsonaro continues to advocate for opening up the country, for basically talking about the coronavirus being a hoax, and much in the Trump style. Now, the thing that I want to point to is at a recent rally that President Bolsonaro went to tout some of these crazy ideas, was a rally in which two flags were featured prominently everywhere, and that was the country flag of Brazil and the Israeli flag. So in my mind, it seems like it's kind of interesting that you have this dictator of a leader, Jair Bolsonaro, who is being confronted by the governors of all these states in Brazil, Jamal, just saying, "You're crazy. The coronavirus is killing our people." That one of his main bases of support in Brazil right now is, again, the pro-Israel support. It seems like the pro-Israeli support, Jamal, really loves to support dictators and these really science deniers in the United States and in Brazil. It was very disturbing. What I want to do is bring our discussion back to what's happening in the United States, because contrary to what you're hearing from the White House, who wanted to disband the coronavirus task force, and Trump at the last minute changed his mind on that, if you take the numbers from New York out of the equation, which are actually showing a plateauing of coronavirus cases and deaths, it's still tragic in New York. Don't get me wrong. There's still hundreds of people who are dying every day in New York. But if you take the New York numbers out of the equation for the U.S., Jamal, what you're seeing in the United States right now is an ongoing, continuing, dramatic increase in the number of exposed coronavirus cases and deaths that are shooting up dramatically. And this goes back to what you said, that, people are reopening their states. The White House and the CDC have said, Jamal, you should not open up states or relax any of these restrictions unless you've had 14 days of steadily declining numbers of people who've been exposed and the number of deaths. Well, guess what, Jamal? Of the 20 plus states that are relaxing things and opening up their states to the economic, to the economy again, not one of those states meets the criteria put forth by the White House and the CDC. What we're seeing, Jamal, is you're seeing what is happening to people who don't have means in this country. And basically what's happening is that people who have wealth, and you're hearing this from the White House and the Republican Party, is that we have to protect our wealth. People have to go back to work. The slaves basically have to go back to the meatpacking plants, back to the fields and all these things. We have to get, quote, our economy back going. But what that really means, Jamal, is that people of color are going to continue to die, because it's the people of color primarily and people who are economically disadvantaged right now who are being basically forced to choose between, going back to work and protecting their livelihood versus dying. Because basically we still don't have enough testing done in this country. We are still on a rapid increase. We know that people of color and African Americans are more likely to get the virus and die from the exposure to the virus. And so basically they've made the calculation, in order to save the economy, we have to kill off and more people of color have to die in order to save the economy. Now, they're not saying it as directly as I just said it or as we're saying it, but that's the ugly truth in the reality of these states and these governors forcing people to have to go back to work under unsafe circumstances. And in fact, Jamal, in some states, if your company opens and your job comes back and you're on unemployment benefits and you don't go back to work because you don't feel safe, guess what? You lose your unemployment benefits. So I really believe, Jamal, we haven't even begun to see the full extent of the catastrophe. And I'm not even talking about the economy. I'm talking about the health and the wellness of large segments of the United States, people who are working labor jobs, people who are working to keep this country going are going to be dying at such a massive rate as time goes on. I'm afraid, Jamal, that this situation is going to continue to get much worse.
Well, Jess, I've been looking at actually a map that was posted on several sites about the states that have been reopening, and it really shocking. And shocking in a way, what you've been talking about is there are a lot of things that are opening that are not deemed as necessary, right?
No, they're not.
Urgent.
No,
I thought like, okay, well, you can understand, businesses opening, like, of course, grocery stores and even restaurants giving takeout food and so forth. But we're talking about in Georgia. I was like looking, barbers are giving haircuts. Basically, they are wearing face masks and latex gloves. In Texas, movie theaters are opening, which I think this is like an incubator, right, for spreading a virus. And basically what they're saying, people can just sit several seats away from the nearest stranger and eat popcorn. And in Tennessee, gyms are opening again, so people are sweating at the gyms. So America's reopening has begun in full force. We're not talking about just like isolated cases. If you're talking about more than half of the states have started to reopen their economies in a major, meaningful way, and others are planning to do it soon. And this is very, very, very troubling. And then there is a whole list, starting, alphabetical list of the states that are open, like Alabama and Alaska and Arkansas and Colorado, starting Florida.
That's
It's a
disturbing.
big, it's a very, 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 very big list, and it seems like they're not reopening like some sections where they want to test it, and it's just like what's going to
Well,
happen after
my
2 weeks
yeah,
if this experiment
my
fails.
problem, Jamal, is I mean, I've been saying this every week now for I don't know how long. But the problem is the federal government continues to not have a national strategic plan for what to do. Number one, there's still not enough testing. There's over 100 different tests out there, and only recently has the FDA and the CDC stepped in and said, we need more regulation because a lot of the tests that are out there are not reliable, not valid, and giving false results. We still don't have enough PPE, personal protective equipment. We're not testing enough. We don't have any treatments that are out there. I mean, I look at this, Jamal, and it just looks to me so crazy that we are a country that still at the top is more interested in, quote, getting the economy back rather than saving the lives of tens of thousands, and it's going to be hundreds of thousands of people who are going to get sick and are going to die from this disease, Jamal, at the expense of, quote, the economy. So these states that are opening up, and if you look at what happened in Southern California last week when people went to the beaches, you know, with no social distancing, you look at this and you just want to pull your hair out and go, you guys are just out of your minds and don't understand how terrible this situation is right now. Not only are you putting yourself at risk, you're putting your families at risk, you're putting your neighborhood at risk, you're putting your communities at risk. And ultimately what it's going to do, it's going to extend the pandemic for a much longer period of time. And it's going to cause much more damage in the long run, Jamal.
Yeah, I'm talking about California. And as you know, California was the first state in the nation to order all residents to stay at home. And yet, there are some counties that refuse to do so. At least I saw one county refusing to do so. They said, you know, they didn't have cases in their county or very little cases. So that's going to be a problem for Governor Newsom, who basically just a couple of days ago talked about that
absolutely, it's going to be a huge problem.
He will start reopening at some point after May 31st, but he warned that the state is months away from any return to normal. So even if you start reopening, which, by the way, we should mention that few of the states like California still is shut down and has restrictions. Connecticut, Delaware, District of Columbia, Illinois, and others have some restrictions.
Yeah, Jamal, I guess I'm just continuing to be very concerned about the kind of deal with the devil that the Trump administration is making with the people of the United States. And the deal with the devil is we're basically going to sacrifice people who are economically disadvantaged. We're going to sacrifice people of color in order to protect the wealth of people who have a lot of resources. I mean, that's really the deal that's going on right now, where you have governors in states that are really putting people in this horrible situation of being forced to choose between feeding their family and dying, and so that the economy for people who already have a lot of wealth can be protected. I think when we look back at this historical moment, Jamal, we're going to look back at this as one of the most morally bankrupt and depraved parts of our history as a country, when we have decided as a society, and I won't say that we, but a very small number of people at the top have decided we're willing to sacrifice large segments of the United States for the good of just a few people who have a lot of wealth. And so I, for one, continue to be deeply, deeply horrified by this, deeply concerned, and unfortunately, I have to say, I think it's only going to get worse.
Well, I mean, we won't know, I guess, until a couple of weeks or something like this from now, after this experiment starts rolling. Because every day that passes, every week that passes, and even with that, they are not, they're just rolling it slowly, rolling it out
No, but
slowly as far
Jamal,
as.
the death rate in the United States, the exposure rate and the death rate is still on a big trajectory upward. So it's not going to just be 2 weeks. It's going to be 2 weeks. It's going to be 2 months. That will maybe even longer before we see the full impact. And on that note, we've come to another end of Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. It's been Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal from our Shelter in Place studios here in Northern California. People can get all of our shows, Jamal. They can go to your Facebook page at Jamal Dajani 2, or they can go to our website, ArabTalkRadio.com.
That's right, and we stay safe, stay sheltered in place if you can,
And believe in
we
science.
will talk to you. Believe in science, and we'll talk to you next week.
We'll see you next week.